5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live. Is Lichtman live? Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Welcome to our wonderful audience. Something extraordinary has happened in the last few days. Not just for the war in Ukraine, but for the history and future of warfare.
Wow, that sounds intense.
It's intense. It's monumental. It is of the utmost importance, and I'll try to put it into appropriate historical context for you.
Okay, let's just get right into it, unless you want to start with something else.
No. So what did Ukraine pull off a couple of days ago?
They were able to do strikes inside of Russia.
Deeply inside of Russia.
Deeply inside of Russia.
As far, north as near the Arctic Circle.
Oh.
Just incredible. And what did they strike?
I don't know, actually.
They struck critical Russian aircraft, including their long-range bombers that carried nuclear weapons. While the results are not exact, but they might have incapacitated some 15 to 30% of the Russian long-range bomber air force. Not only limiting the ability of Russia to strike at Ukraine, since some of these aircraft are used to launch missiles against Ukraine, but also undermining the Russian nuclear capability. Can you imagine that? And how many casualties did Ukraine suffer in this extraordinary series of attacks, Sam?
It's a war with robots, as you like to call it.
Right, zero.
Zero, right.
It was drones, a series of drone attacks.
An unmanned aerial vehicle or unmanned...
Oh, Siri.
Oops. A series of drone attacks that cost about $1 million. And although, again, it's hard to get intelligence from inside Russia, but Russian damages are likely to run into the billions of dollars. It is one of the most effective, cost-efficient strikes in the history of warfare. And it suggests something brand new in at least 2 or 3 different ways, a brand new technological breakthrough in warfare that's going to change war forever and put the strongest nations of the world, including the United States, China, Russia, on high alert. That's how momentous this is.
That's a little scary.
Yeah, it's very scary. But first, let me put it in some historical perspective.
Okay, do it.
Now, when we think about the history of warfare, we think about epic clashes, right?
Right.
Of troops, We think about the incredible Spartan resistance at Thermopylae. George Washington, at Yorktown defeating the British forces, the colonial wars in Africa, the trench warfare of World War I. We also think of the great military commanders, right?
Right.
Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Napoleon Bonaparte, Genghis Khan.
Do you hear that? That's your soda.
Oh, is my soda exploding?
Twist your cap real quick.
Hold that. I'm getting to the
Okay, you're good. I don't hear it anymore.
big finale here.
Sorry.
I forget where I am now.
You said Genghis Khan.
Genghis Khan, Shaka Zulu, Gustavus Adolphus, Blackjack Pershing of World War I, Field Marshal Montgomery of World War II, George Washington, Stoneman Norman Schwarzkopf of the Gulf War under George H.W. Bush. All of this is legitimate and significant. But overshadowing all of this, what really defines warfare, you know what that is, Sam?
No.
Technology.
Okay.
Technology is what creates warfare. Way back, like 5,500 BC, the domestication of the horse changed everything, right?
Right.
It led to the modern cavalry, and until very recently, most transportation was driven by what?
Foot.
Horses.
Oh, that's yes. That's
yes,
what I meant.
of course. Then we had the Bronze Age, right, which totally changed warfare because you now have these metal daggers and swords. Then the Iron Age, which created even more effective kinds of weapons, swords, daggers, battle axes. Then we had during the medieval times the invention of the stirrup, the knights on horseback, chainmail, other kinds of armor, which completely changed warfare. Then we had knights defeated by the crossbow, the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. And then, of course, everything changed again with the invention of gunpowder, right, Sam?
Right.
From, 12th, 13th century onward. Handheld weapons and, of course, cannons and mortars. Then in the 19th century, we had the invention of automatic weapons, including machine guns that could kill vastly more efficiently than any previous weapon.
This is scary stuff.
This is what defined warfare,
Right.
technology. Then in World War I, we had the introduction of the tank, right? The submarine became to the fore. And, of course, the first significant use of aircraft. And then by the time of World War II, the aircraft carrier had supplanted the battleship as the primary seagoing weapon. And, of course, we had all kinds of technological developments like the delayed action fuse, radar-guided munitions and aircraft, and, of course, ultimately the development of atomic weaponry, which really defined relations between the superpowers ever since 1945. But now we have something new. Asymmetrical warfare via munitions that do not directly involve human beings except remotely. Think how frightening that is. You can wage destructive warfare without risking any lives on your part. You can rain terror on other countries. Now, what do I mean by, do you know what we mean by asymmetrical warfare, Sam?
Tell me.
That means minor powers or minor forces can wreak great damage on vastly superior forces. We saw that in 9/11, right?
Right.
A few unknowns, a few people with box cutters brought down the World Twin Towers, the World Trade Centers, killing thousands of persons. They damaged the Pentagon, if not for the courageous, self-sacrificing acts of some of the passengers on another plane, they might have wrought damage on the U.S. Capitol. Asymmetrical warfare. How much was spent on that incredible destruction? Almost nothing.
Right.
No significant weaponry was used. Yes, there were a few casualties because these were suicide missions, but a tiny fraction of the casualties they saw. Asymmetrical warfare. But that was waged, in essence, by non-state actors who sacrificed themselves. Now, in this Ukraine war, we have seen a new kind of asymmetrical warfare, Sam. And that involves nation states battling one another.
With robots?
With robots, with drones. And I think the future is going to be no more ground soldiers.
So is this it's kind of confusing to me. Is this a good thing or a bad thing?
I haven't gotten to that.
Oh, okay.
I haven't finished describing it.
Okay.
All right?
All right.
So we have asymmetrical warfare waged by, in essence, robots, whether drones or other robotic weaponry that don't require a human presence and could wreak enormous destruction. Now, this is a game changer in the Ukraine war because it greatly raises the costs to Russia of continuing this war. You know, it's one thing for Putin to wreak destruction on Ukraine. It's another thing for destruction being wrought on his own nation.
Right.
It's a whole new dimension of the war. At the same time, by the way, they also badly damaged a bridge in Crimea, which has undermined their supply chains. This gives the total lie to the line propagated, fabricated by J.D. Vance and Trump, right? Oh, you Ukrainians have no cards. That's what they said, you know.
Right.
No way you could stand up to the might of Russia. Yeah, once again, totally wrong. The game has changed in an incalculable way. Now, Sam, how did this strike on Russian airfields differ from the drone strikes that Russia has launched against Ukraine?
I have no idea.
It was launched solely on military targets.
I see.
The Russians target hospitals,
right.
schools,
right.
residential neighborhoods,
right.
because their aim is not necessarily to take out military targets, but to wreak terror on the people of Ukraine to force them to submit. And that's only one of the many atrocities committed by Putin and his allies in Russia. This has profound implications. This new form of warfare, like the introduction of gunpowder or the stirrup or the machine gun or the tank, this has profound implications for every nation in the world, including the superpowers. Think about this, Sam.
Okay.
What is lurking offshore around the United States? Underwater.
What is lurking?
What is lurking underwater around the United States near our big cities? Underwater. Submarines.
Okay.
So imagine if these submarines launched 10, 20, 30,000 drones against American cities.
Sounds bad.
It'd be horrific. You know, no matter what kind of defense you have, that many attacks would overwhelm them. And what would it cost the Russians or the Chinese who have these submarines?
Probably not a lot.
Basically nothing. They launch these drones and get out of the way.
How did Ukraine get their drones all the way into Russia without them being shot
They
down?
smuggled them in on, I believe, on trucks. And here's the thing. It's not that hard to do in Russia because Russia is a top-down, hidebound bureaucracy. And while Putin has stifled dissent, there is still a tremendous amount of underlying protest and dissent. Not necessarily even against the war, but against the economic privation that Putin has imposed upon his people. They're apparently planning this for a year and a half. Wow. It was brilliantly done. And, you know, Russia's so vast, too. You know, it's pretty hard to protect all of its territory. And, you know,
right.
detecting trucks, you know, there are, I'm sure, tens of thousands of trucks traversing Russia every day. It was absolutely brilliantly done on the cheap with no even risk, really, of casualties.
Right.
And inflicted huge damage on Russia, both real and psychological.
Sure.
Absolutely. And also, you know, maybe we'll stiffen the Trump administration in their support for Ukraine, but I dare say, you know, I'm loath to predict whether Trump will act rationally or not. But this is of historic importance. It is a new phase of warfare. And my next prediction is the ground soldier will be gone. And who's going to replace the ground soldier, Sam?
Robots.
So, you know, you can invade countries, engage in urban atrocities without risking any of your people. It's really frightening, the future of warfare.
So is Trump right to want to build? Because when I first heard Trump say that he wants to build this like golden dome over the U.S., at first I thought the U.S. hasn't been attacked in hundreds of years. This is a waste of money. But are you saying maybe it's not such a bad idea?
It's not such a bad idea. I'm not technological enough to know whether it's going to work. You know, I did write about Reagan's Star Wars. Remember that?
Yeah.
And I said, that's ridiculous. We're going to waste tens of billions of dollars, and it's never going to work because, yeah, it might stop one or two missiles, but if Russia launches 1,000 missiles, even if it knocks out 80% of them, which is way beyond what anyone would think.
What's a missile?
A missile.
Oh, because you said Mitchell.
Oh.
I just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing.
I think we are.
I do
missiles.
I have met people named Mitchell before.
Yeah, no.
Missile.
Maybe they have Mitchells too, but these are missiles.
Okay.
You got to forgive me for that. Even if 80% were knocked down, way beyond expectations. If 200 missiles on with megaton warheads, right? Hundreds of times greater than the Hiroshima bomb. Can you imagine? All of the United States would be destroyed anyway.
Yikes.
But maybe drones are different. I'm not a technologist. But if it strikes me, if 10, 20,000 drones are launched against us, I am a little bit skeptical, you know. And the other thing is, Pete Hegseth in charge of this?
Oh, God.
Can you imagine?
That guy's a joke.
It's a joke. Yeah. I mean, it may be a nice idea, but you put it in the hands of an utter incompetent, utter unqualified Secretary of Defense, and we know it's going to be an absolute fiasco. But, you know, maybe in light of what just happened in the transformation of warfare, there may be something to be said if it can be done right and led by competent people, not by Pete Hegseth. And by the way, speaking of Pete Hegseth, you know what he just did in terms of renaming one of our Navy ships? It's an oiler named after Harvey Milk. You know who Harvey Milk is? Was
he the mayor of San Francisco?
On the board of supervisors, one of the very first, if not the first, openly gay person to be elected to that kind of position. And he was murdered shortly thereafter as kind of a hero in the LGBTQ plus community. They almost never rename ships once they're named. And this didn't come from the Navy, apparently. It came from Pete Hegseth. They want to rename the ship. Why?
That's messed up. I guess because they're homophobic.
Exactly, because they don't believe non-heterosexual people can make any contributions to anything. And I don't know if this is true, but I've seen reporting that they are at least considering renaming ships that are named after civil rights heroes, including Harriet Tubman. You know who she was?
Black.
Yes, she led the Underground Railroad to save the slaves. And Thurgood Marshall, you know who he was?
Black.
First African-American on the Supreme Court.
They are only targeting a gay man, a black man, and a black woman.
And they may also be targeting Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Another woman.
And this is consistent with their erasing the contributions of women and black people from the recounting of our military heroes and our military exploits. So I talked about this before. You know, you got to understand that this is not something brand new. That America has always been polarized between two utterly different visions of the country, right, Sam?
Yes.
One is tolerant, inclusive, diverse. The other is narrow, restrictive, intolerant. And, you know, the country's been narrowly balanced between those two approaches to America. Let's not forget, you know, we had slavery for hundreds of years. We had Jim Crow until the 1960s, and even today it's not totally abolished. And Trump and his allies have come down squarely on the side of intolerance, bigotry, a narrow and restricted vision of who counts in America. In other words, just because of who you are, you don't have the same rights and the same privileges as white, male, heterosexual Americans. But I've got something else on my mind, Sam.
Okay.
Remember Trump said, oh, our standing in the world has collapsed under what president? Biden. And he was going to restore our standing in the world again, right?
That's what I've heard him say.
Just like he was going to end the Ukraine war in 24 hours and quickly bring down grocery prices. Well, we just had a test of that promise from Donald Trump.
Okay, cool.
This is a brand new report from a very credible polling outfit, Morning Consult, and they surveyed adults in 41 countries. Okay?
Okay.
You with me?
Yes.
In January 2024, when they last took this survey a little over a year ago, who was president?
Joseph
Biden. And as compared to our big rival China, we were 20 points above. 20 points in the black. China was in the negative. So our gap was over 20 points. You know where we stand today?
Tell me.
Minus 1.5, and China has scored a plus 8.8.
Interesting.
Close to a 40-point negative swing.
Interesting.
Overall, the poll found that only 13 of 41 countries surveyed, a complete turnaround from the Biden years, only 13 of 41 countries favored the United States over China.
Right.
So much for restoring our standing around the world.
Right.
A couple more things. I want to, say our heart goes out to the victims of the anti-Semitic incendiary attack and all of their families and loved ones. It was just an utterly despicable act.
In Boulder, you're saying?
Yes, in Boulder, Colorado. But keep in mind, I hate to, put a wet blanket on this, but keep in mind that Trump and his allies are exploiting anti-Semitism for their own political purposes. Remember, even after a gunman killed 11 Jewish worshipers at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, a gunman who said, like Trump, we were invaded by a caravan, and then said, it's the Jews who are organizing it. One of the oldest anti-Jewish memes in history. Even after that, you know who Donald Trump prominently hosted at Mar-a-Lago?
Nick Fuentes?
Nick Fuentes and Kanye West, two of the most notorious, prominent anti-Semites. And remember, this is the guy who said, there are fine people among the Charlottesville right-wingers shouting, Jews will not replace us, who made Jews scapegoats by saying, if I lose the election, it's the fault of the Jews. So don't be deceived. Anti-Semitism is horrific. I've been fighting it all my life. I've experienced it. But it is, once again, exploiting the Jews to use phony anti-Semitism to promote your political agenda. Last point. Trump's buddy Elon Musk, right?
Oh, this freaking guy. I'm so sick of this guy.
What? Well, this will be real quick.
No, we can talk about it. It's fine. I'm just.
What did he say?
He's all up in arms about the GOP bill.
The tax and spending bill.
The big, beautiful bill.
Yeah, instead of calling it the big, beautiful bill, you know what he called it?
Tell me.
A disgusting abomination. I'll repeat that. A disgusting abomination. This is the guy that Trump just hosted and lauded and praised, said he didn't care about his drug use because he was such a terrific guy doing such a great job. And now, of course, Trump is probably going to say he hates America, just like when judges that he appointed ruled against him, he said they must be hating America. Even the Federalist Society, who helped him pick out conservative judges, their head, Leonard Leo, must hate America. I guess if you don't like Trump, that means you must hate America.
Give me a break. I'm so sick of
I've talked about
like
this
that.
before. He thinks he's, King Louis XIV, who said, I am the state. He thinks I am the state. And so anything negative about me has to be because you hate America, because I am America. There's no difference between Donald Trump and America.
Give me a break.
We are one and the same. And he's explicit about this. He says, I run America, I run the country because I'm saving the country. I'm not bound by the Constitution and the laws. He didn't understand what was in the Constitution about habeas corpus, right? Didn't understand about due process. And his hand-picked person to head the Department of Homeland Security, responsible for ICE and all the deportations and all the protections of the homeland. What did she say habeas corpus represented? Do you remember?
Not off the top.
It's the authority that gives Donald Trump the ability to deport immigrants. It's just the opposite of that.
Hold on 1 second. Hold on. I'm going to mute us for a split second. I need to make a quick change. Okay, go ahead.
I forget where I was. Oh, yeah. The head said habeas corpus is what gives Trump the authority to.
Okay, go ahead.
It's just the opposite. It says you cannot detain or deport people without giving them a chance to challenge it without due process. So Trump said, we can't have due process. It's too messy. We'd have too many trials. That's not the way it works, is it, Sam?
No, I don't know. I have no respect. I've talked about this before, but I have no respect for people who, glaze up Trump and support Trump. And now that he's in office, they're all up in arms. Joe Rogan was so up in arms about Trump's immigration policy. Elon Musk is so up in arms about this GOP bill. Elon, the GOP and Trump have been about this life from the moment Trump stepped on the political arena.
2015.
The idea that this bill is some big surprise to you and now you're in such defiance. Give me a break. No respect for you, bro.
Completely agree. Trump is not deceptive. That's not his problem. That's not what's wrong with Trump.
This is basically a continuation of what they did in his he and Congress did in his
and
first
everything
term.
He's done, he's been right out front about. And in fact, this bill harkens back to the bill of his first term, right? Which blew a several trillion-dollar hole in the deficit and was also a big tax cut. Remember, a big thrust of this bill is just a continuation of the 2017 tax cuts that contributed so mightily to the deficit after Trump campaigned, of course, saying, I'm going to reduce the deficit big time. You've never seen anything like it before in this country. You know how Trump talks.
Right. And again, Elon, if you bought that, then you're an idiot. If you didn't just look at the facts of how Trump and Congress operate in terms of their spending bills, then you're an idiot, period.
I'm baffled. I don't understand it, how people could think that Trump is any different.
I'm not baffled. Elon wanted to use Trump for his own gain.
I get Elon. Elon.
Now that he doesn't have him for his own gain, he can criticize him.
Elon, I get.
We've all taken the pain for all of this.
What about the 50% of voters who voted for him?
Well, yeah.
As I said, part of it was just massive disinformation. The other thing that we talked about that's been disclosed in recent polls, that a huge chunk of Trump's support is from people who don't follow what's going on.
Right.
Who might just hear a few sound bites from Trump, sounds great, and don't dig beyond that.
Yeah.
All right. I just want to quickly, I know others have talked about this, but do you recall what Senator Jody Ernst said when someone said people are going to die because they lose
talk about this?
Yes,
woman?
because
Okay.
said, we're all going to die anyway. Well, she doesn't have to worry about dying because she can't get medical care. Who covers her, Sam?
The American taxpayer.
The American taxpayer. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, she's a freaking joke. Everybody knows it.
But she's no different from the rest of them. It's not like she stands out as an outlier. And then one last thing.
Okay.
I've got to get to this.
Okay.
This is a report in the New York Times. It was well sourced. And we've talked about the fact that cutting off USAID means life-saving medicines are not going to get to the poorest people, particularly in Africa, especially the medical program for HIV, started by what president, Sam? George W. Bush. That's credited with saving tens of millions of lives. This is all now being undermined, and according to the New York Times, it may already have resulted in 300,000 deaths. Maybe. But certainly many, many deaths. And Marco Rubio says, oh, no one's died because of this. Well, the New York Times came back and gave specific examples of kids who have died because their medicine was cut off by the Trump administration.
In Joni Ertz's fake apology video where she was essentially just trolling, she, again, mocked people who were concerned about people dying who are having Medicare from a town hall where she was falsely accusing immigrants of taking Medicaid, that's what I meant. And then at the end of that fake apology video, she said, if you want to live forever, I implore you to join me in my love and dedication for Jesus Christ. I mean, it couldn't have been more hypocritical. In one breath, she is criticizing immigrants, which Jesus would hate. She was denying people health care and basic services, which Jesus would hate. And then at the end said that she is some sort of, holier than thou Jesus follower, and you must follow Jesus if you want to live forever. I mean, it was like almost in a nutshell, it's like the epitome of how hypocritical the far-right Christian nationalist movement is in America. It was sickening.
We've talked about this a lot, and you put it very well, Sam. I think we're ready for questions.
Yes.
Housekeeping.
Before we do that, you can follow us below. There's 1,200 people watching. If you haven't followed us, go ahead and follow us, right, Dad?
Absolutely.
Why not? It's free to follow somebody.
And we need members and donations, right, to keep us going.
You weren't going to let me get to that point?
Oh, well, of course. I always try to jump you on that.
Literally, I think
you were literally ready to go.
Episode, you jump me on that. Or repeat it. Okay, perfect. We've only got 421 likes, but we've got over 1,300 people watching. Make sure you like the stream because that helps the algorithm. If you want your question in line for this man, Alan Lichtman, you got to donate or you got to become a member today. I highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. All right, you can talk.
A membership costs less than a milkshake, right? Yeah. And it's better for you than a milkshake.
That is true. Although I do like milkshakes.
I do too, but I try to avoid them. I am now less than 2 months from the Senior Olympics.
Wow.
Yeah, my event is end of July.
I've been
1,500 and 800.
I've been helping him train, although I'm dealing with calf injuries, which I can't seem to.
He's been helping me a lot and sacrificing his own injuries.
Well, yeah. All right, let's get to some questions. The first one is a $10 donation from Sunlit Man.
Nice.
They say, Ukraine's success in the Kursk offensive gave Biden the military success key. Could the drone strike ironically win Trump the key in the same way? What if Trump, being Trump, tried to take credit? That's an interesting point.
It's a very interesting point. But let me say, first of all, it wasn't just the Kursk offensive. It was the fact that it was Biden and Biden alone who put together the coalition of the West. Not Merkel, not Macron, not Trudeau. That stopped Russia cold from conquering Ukraine and kept Ukraine alive for years. So you got to understand that that was the underlying basis for winning the key. So I don't think this strike alone, particularly given the things Trump and Vance have said about Ukraine and the way they've cozied up to Putin, is going to win the key, although it's way too early to turn keys. But will Trump claim credit?
Of course.
Yes. Remember what he said about the economy? Do you remember that, Sam?
Everything bad is Biden, everything good is me.
Yeah.
All right, our next question is from one of our members, Diane. They say, I'm proud of Zelensky, but will Europe help to continue the assault on Russia? I'm afraid that Putin will ramp up his aggression. What is Trump's position going to be?
I'm pretty confident that Europe is going to continue to assist Ukraine without limits. You know, this kind of strike deep into Russia indicates that the gloves are off. You know, that long-range weapons, drones against the Russian homeland is now on the table. And that is an important turn in the war. Will Putin ramp up his aggression? Absolutely. And you can expect it as it is to be cruel, to be war crimes, to be targeted against the civilian population. And God knows what Trump is going to do. You know, he's been such a pawn of Putin. He's basically given Putin everything he wants, gotten nothing in return. No,
Trump is the great deal maker. He had to have gotten something in return by now, right?
Maybe one of those Russian dolls,
Well, okay, then you go.
He got a big plane from Qatar.
What happened with that? Has that gone through, or what's the deal with that?
I don't know, but apparently, according to Hegseth, it's going through.
Oh God!
Whether Congress is going to act or not, who knows? Because it's a clear violation of the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution, which says a federal officer, including the president, cannot take anything of value from a foreign nation. And that obviously something of value would include a $400 million plane?
I would think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is from our good friend Jim Blowers.
Yeah, he's one of our buddies.
This week, I was at a discussion group in which the idea of an epistocracy, am I saying that right?
Yes.
Epistocracy, which is ruled by knowledge. Would such a system work?
Well, this goes back to Plato's Republic, Sam, right?
Yes, correct.
Yes. What Plato was envisioning is exactly what you're talking about, that there were various divisions of society, starting with the most knowledgeable and then going down to the ordinary workers. And it would be a meritocracy in which the most knowledgeable, the most noble persons would rule in the interests of everyone. Plato's ideal republic. The problem is, how do you achieve that?
Good question.
I
don't know.
thought about that a lot since I read Plato's Republic decades ago, and I haven't come up with an answer.
Our good friend Vacuum Tubes for Hi-Fi with a $30 donation. They say, are you familiar with the 1930s Volksempfang VE301 radio receiver? A nickname for it was Goebbels' snout.
Yes, you know who Goebbels was?
Yeah, he was the head of propaganda for the Nazi Party. They say, I studied the circuit diagram, and it was made so it could not easily receive long-distance radio stations.
I'll have to defer to you, Sam. You're the technician. I mean, I've heard of this. I know about it, but I can't comment on the technology of it.
I don't know anything about 1930s radios.
Right.
I mean...
But I'm sure our very knowledgeable Vacuum Tubes, if he studied the circuit diagram, which I could never do, I'm sure he's right, and I don't understand. I guess it was designed just for short-term communications within the Reich.
Not short-term, short-distance.
Short-distance, excuse me.
And so I guess that the citizenry probably couldn't get external radio signals
from Britain or the U.S.
Yeah. Spencer Arno became a member. Thank you, Spencer. What are your thoughts on the tragic events that unfolded in Boulder, and what can be done to prevent further attacks while also condemning the genocide in Gaza? Too often, criticism of Bibi, the Israeli government, and the settlers go falsely conflated with support for Hamas.
I couldn't agree with you more. I am as strong a supporter of Israel as anyone. And I have a 50-plus year record, 60-plus year record of supporting Israel. But I think Bibi is the worst thing that possibly could have happened to Israel. He has made Israel an international pariah. He has forfeited the moral high ground on which Israel and the Jewish community once stood. He has committed the worst kinds of atrocities in Gaza. Unbelievable that a Jewish state should be doing this. But Trump wants to conflate criticism of Bibi with anti-Semitism or a lack of support for Israel. It's really important that anyone who has an audience makes that distinction clear. And, you never can stop a single individual from committing horrific acts. We have virtually a mass shooting involving at least 4 victims almost every single day in the United States. More mass shootings than our G7 allies plus Australia combined. And the only way, A, I think we got to have reasonable gun control, and B, we've got to tone down the extremist rhetoric.
Should Trump ban the Muslim Brotherhood after what happened with Israel and Hamas and due to the suspect of the attack in Colorado?
I don't think you could ban an entire organization because of an attack on the part of one individual, but certainly there are all, I'm not a lawyer, but there are laws in which if you could prove an organization presents a clear and present danger to the American people, you can ban them, like the Nazi Party, for example.
It seems, especially with this Israeli-Palestine issue, we've really let the most extreme of both sides sort of dictate how you're allowed to talk about it, which is really sad and confusing, and I think just adds to the conflict, because there's a lot of things that you can say that are both true, like Bibi is a monster, Hamas are monsters. You should be able to criticize Israel without being called anti-Semitic. You should be able to criticize Hamas without being called some Israeli genocide.
Anti-Muslim.
Right? It's like all these things can be true at the same time.
Of course they are. And unfortunately, that also fuels the conflict in the Middle East, in that each side has this extremist view of the other. I was horrified when there was this demonstration of the far right in Israel with demonstrators chanting a death to the Palestinians.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just sad that it seems like we can't come at this from a place where I think most people agree on. Again,
we do. I think that's right. I think most people, think Bibi is awful and think Hamas is awful.
Right. Brady says, as you predicted, the Doge initiative was a complete failure. Do you take their failure as a success for the country, or do you think they still cause a lot of problems without much upside in costs saved for the taxpayer?
I do think the fact that it failed and that it seems to, at the moment, to be ended, although Trump has promised he's going to continue it, I think that's going to be very, very difficult. And as I explained, it hasn't saved anything. And yes, it's caused a huge number of problems. And we should not underestimate the human cost of this. Musk waves this chainsaw around, but who is the chainsaw digging into? Real people who are losing their livelihoods, including people who might have disabled kids and they can't pay their medical bills, or they struggling to pay their rent or put food on the table. It's cruel, and they don't care about the cruelty. In fact, Elon Musk has said, well, one of our big problems is empathy. That's a problem as opposed to a virtue. And if you believe in the teachings of Jesus, you should understand that empathy is very much in line with those teachings. So I'm glad it stopped, although I'm not convinced it will stop. And I think the problems it caused, unfortunately, will be reverberating because, they've really undermined a lot of important agencies. One thing I could not believe, aside from Kristi Noem, which is, in the stratosphere for cruelty, but the head of FEMA, you know what FEMA is, Sam?
The Federal Emergency Management Association.
Yeah, they deal with things like hurricanes.
Like that.
And the head of it, the guy in charge, said, I didn't know there was a hurricane season.
No, he didn't say
He said it. That is an exact quote. When he was asked about the hurricane season, he said, which is starting now, He said, I didn't know there was a hurricane season. And guess what? With all these plans for FEMA, they all fell apart. All of their plans for FEMA, because, not only are they destructive, but they're totally incompetent, completely fell apart, and they're now reverting back to a plan devised, guess under what administration?
DJT.
Nope, Joe Biden.
Oh.
They're going back to Joe Biden's plans, whether they can execute it or not, given, this guy who knows nothing. We saw the same thing with RFK Jr., who knew nothing about the two huge, many hundreds of billions of dollar programs that he is in charge of, Medicare and Medicaid. He knew nothing about them. So aside from the cruelty, the incompetence is overwhelming.
Our friend Alex Kawa says, what is your opinion on age limits for members of Congress? After all, 3 congressmen, all in their 70s, at least 2 of whom had cancer, have died this Congress so far. Is that true? I didn't even know that. Keep in mind they were all Dems, and given the, quote, big beautiful bill passed by a single vote, them dying in office arguably directly led to that. Is that true?
It could be. I don't believe it, because I think if there had been more Democratic votes, some of the Republicans who, for political purposes, either didn't vote or didn't vote for it would make sure it passed. So, no, I don't believe that. But you'll never know. Again, history only gets played once. You can't replay it. And to change qualifications for federal office, you would have to amend the Constitution. They tried it with legislation for term limits, not age limits. And it was declared unconstitutional.
Gotcha.
Because the qualifications for Congress, the Senate, and the President are set in the Constitution.
Right. There has been a big ICE arrest in Massachusetts where a high schooler named Marcelo Gomez was detained when it should have been his dad, all over a speeding ticket. Do you think they will free the student, or do they both face deportation?
I hope they will free him, but I'm not optimistic. Here's what's happening.
I believe there's been big protests. His high school classmates have gathered to ask him to be free.
Here's what's happening.
Okay.
So they've had all these court decisions about these illegal deportations. And they haven't openly said, we're not going to obey the courts. But what have they done? What is the Trump the master of? That he always has been, and that was so evident in what happened with his trials.
Weaseling out.
Deflect, delay, obstruct. So you don't openly defy the courts, but you continue to deflect, to delay, to obstruct. Trump has honed this tactic ever since he was found to have violated the Fair Housing Act back in the early 1970s by discriminating against minorities in his real estate company. He delayed, he deflected, he obstructed. He hired Roy Cohen to do that, the notorious Joseph McCarthy Red Baiter lawyer, and slipped out of it. And that's exactly the same tactic he is following now. And I suspect you're going to see that here as well.
Germany's incoming chancellor, Friedrich Merz, has unveiled ambitious plans to significantly boost military spending in response to growing security concerns in Europe. Professor Lichtman, as a historian, what is your opinion of risks of expanding German militarism for the first time since 1945?
Yeah, I look, I'm against militarism. I'm against arms races in general. And under ordinary circumstances, I would find this troubling. But we're not in ordinary circumstances. With American aid uncertain for Ukraine, Germany becomes the key player in the most significant war in Europe since World War II. I'll repeat that. The most significant war in Europe in World War II. So under these circumstances, I can understand what's happening here.
And isn't there something to be said that, yes, Germany fell into Nazism, but prior to Nazism, Germany was actually one of the most progressive societies in Europe.
It was astonishing that they fell into Nazism. And unfortunately, there are kind of proto-neo-Nazi parties springing up in Germany with the support of, guess who?
J.D. Vance.
J.D. Vance. Openly supporting them.
Yeah,
it's frightening.
It's really insane.
And they claim to be against anti-Semitism?
Yeah, right. Give me a break.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
This is from one of our Discord members. If you want to join the Discord, the link to that is in the description in our link tree. Nano Rider says, Professor Lichtman, can you talk about the governor of Louisiana, Huey Long? It was said that he was America's first Hitler back under FDR. Roosevelt was concerned with the power that Long had.
You know I don't like comparing anyone to Hitler, Sam.
Right.
Huey Long was not a Hitler. He was not a mass murderer like Hitler. He was an authoritarian, like many of the corrupt politicians in the South. He was active in the 1920s and 1930s. And indeed, FDR was concerned about him because Huey Long was probably the second most charismatic politician in America after Franklin Roosevelt himself. And Huey Long was planning, apparently, we don't know for sure, to run an independent campaign against FDR in 1936 when FDR was seeking his first re-election. FDR actually had a pollster. It wasn't like scientific polls, but he had a pollster named Neil Hurria who warned him that Huey Long could take enough votes from FDR's left to put his re-election in jeopardy, which is one of the factors why the second New Deal was more radical than the first New Deal of FDR's first 2 years. We'll never know what might have happened because I think it was in September 1935, Huey Long was assassinated.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, most people don't know that.
Professor, you were not wrong. You screwed up when you got overzealous and said Harris was the same as Biden, that she was in office and she was a Democrat, if I remember correctly.
I never said she was the same as Biden. I did say the Democrats united behind her.
Do you think the midterms will be decided by the business community, not the MAGA base?
Probably neither. I think the midterms will be decided by the degree of dissatisfaction against Donald Trump. We've already seen that in some of the off-year elections, with Democrats doing well in heavily Republican districts and even flipping some seats. Again, I don't think the Democrats have come close to taking advantage of the depredations to our traditions wrought by Donald Trump. They still haven't found a compelling message. Everybody knows what MAGA is, right?
Right.
Everybody knows what MAHA is, pretty much. Most people know what the big, beautiful bill is. What do they know from the Democratic side? Yeah. Nothing. How much time do we have left?
7 minutes.
Oh, okay. We can take a bunch more.
This is a Discord member, Chad DeRoston. They say, hey, Professor, considering the keys were made when major party nominees weren't decided by popular vote, should the definition of the party contest key be adjusted to include candidates who either poll above a certain amount or are a major political player, regardless of whether party insiders choose to acknowledge them? I find it difficult to justify not considering RFK Jr., I'm assuming, a major challenger when he was polling at 20%, regardless of party insiders refusing to acknowledge him and hold an open primary.
It's very difficult to change the keys on the fly. I've talked about that a lot. The keys, did take into account the modern era of selection by party primaries, which were decided by the popular vote of those who participated in the primaries. Because remember, I developed the keys in 1981, and the first year in which primaries decided elections, primaries and caucuses, was 1972 as a result of the reforms of the McGovern Commission in 1968. So, I'm looking at the keys. I've got time to, but you can't just change the keys on the fly.
Right. Thank you to John Rogers, who just donated 5 memberships.
Oh, nice.
Super nice, dude.
Yeah, that's great.
Which nonfiction history book would you recommend to fully and better understand USA's culture, ideas, and socio-political history?
I would recommend my most recent book. We got it right there, Sam.
Conservative at the Core, A New History of American
Conservatism.
Excuse me.
You're so excited by the book.
Yeah.
That'll be out September 1, Notre Dame University Press. You could pre-order it at the Notre Dame University Press website or on Amazon. I also very much like John Meacham, The Soul of America, Ibram Kendi, Stamped from the Beginning. And if you're a left-winger, you probably would love Howard Zinn, A People's History of the United States.
I'm reading Ezra Klein's new book, Abundance, right now, and I'm enjoying it. I recommend that.
Yeah.
It's not, it's sort of related. It's a book.
I love Jill Lepore. I see.
Oh, I forgot to read that.
Yeah, absolutely. She would be another author that I would recommend to you.
They say, is These Truths by Jill Lepore a good book for this? And
yeah, absolutely. Jill Lepore is terrific. Anything by Jill Lepore is well worth reading. What?
Is she a historian?
Yeah.
Cool.
Very good.
All right. Can you talk about the tourism crash from academics not feeling safe traveling to the USA for conferences?
Yeah, it's absolutely understandable. I've talked about this before. One of the things that really hurt the Soviet Union and Russia was the brain drain. People fleeing or not wanting to come there. And now you have a situation where academics don't feel safe coming to the U.S. for conferences, for good reason, given how Trump has targeted those who are foreigners. And it goes much deeper than that. What have they tried to do with respect to foreign students?
Just kick them out.
Kick them out. And, you know, they provide an incredibly important source of brain power. There's a wonderful article I saw, I forget where I saw it now, which talks about a very important historical development, the deportation of a Chinese living in the United States who was working on developing critical American nuclear systems. They sent him to China, and guess what he did in China?
Tell me.
What?
Tell me.
Developed the nuclear weapons system. Without that deportation, China might have been 10 or 20 years behind where it is now.
Interesting. Also, a lot of the Jews who were kicked out of Europe came to the U.S. and helped them during World War II as well.
Including Albert Einstein. Einstein, my hero.
Right. And Goebbels? No, not Goebbels. Bohr? Is that it? Who am I thinking of?
I think
it's Bohr.
No, it's Niels Bohr is Danish. He was not, if that's who you're thinking of.
Oh, he wasn't Jewish?
I don't think so. He was Danish anyway.
Okay.
Not German.
Forget it. $5 donation from Wind of Gust. They say, long ago, why did you switch from biology to history?
Short answer. I hated the sight of blood.
Okay.
Didn't like sick people.
Okay.
Was really bad with them. And was terribly clumsy in the laboratory.
So what made you even pursue that in the first place?
That was kind of my son, the doctor, you know. It was sort of, and I try to explain to my parents, it's just a different kind of doctor, you know.
Right.
And they weren't buying it for a moment. Eventually they came around, but it took a long time. I remember, too, when I was on Tic-Tac-Dough with the late, great Wink Martindale, who just died a few months ago in 1981. It took him a week to understand I couldn't really help him with his sore shoulder. I wasn't that kind of doctor.
Right. All right, this will be our final question for the night. If you want to keep chilling, if you want to keep hanging out, the good news is...
You know who you may be thinking of? Not Niels Bohr, but Wernher von Braun, the father of American rocketry, who was... He didn't voluntarily come to the United States, but was part of an operation called Operation Paperclip, in which America grabbed former Nazi scientists and took them to the United States.
I just have this memory of watching Oppenheimer last year, and there was another big Jewish scientist who had come here.
Isidore Rabi was a major Jewish scientist who was featured in the movie, but I think he's native. Niels Bohr was definitely, in the movie,
right,
major, but as I said, he's Danish as far as I recall.
But it doesn't mean he's not Jewish.
I don't think he was being persecuted.
No?
No.
Okay, let me look it up.
I don't believe he was Jewish.
Jewish.
But I'm not positive.
Yeah.
He is.
Wait.
I don't think so. But maybe. All right. We'll check.
His mom was Jewish. His dad was not.
All right.
All right, anyways.
So we're both right.
All right, our final question of the night. The good news is, if you want to keep hanging out, the Lichtman Live post show is coming right after this.
That's really good news.
This is a $10 donation from Harry. They say, your discussion of Medicaid/U.S. aid reminds me of the Mangione assassination.
You know what that is?
Yes.
Yeah, the CEO of the big healthcare insurance
how health
firm.
insurance firms paid out claims in waves that were previously deemed unnecessary, which saved thousands of lives.
Paid out, I'm not sure what that is referring to.
Healthcare insurance firms paid out claims in waves that were previously deemed unnecessary. I don't know what they mean.
I'm not up on that, so I'm going to have to pass on that. The reason he was supposedly assassinated was just the opposite, that his company was stiffing people on their claims, which I have experienced and probably everyone has experienced who's dealt with insurance companies.
I think everybody has. All right, 2 quick donations for Meta, What, and Pan. Thank you guys so much for your donation. If you're still watching, we've got over 1,100, almost 1,200 people watching, but only 736 likes. If you're still here, give us a like. The Lichtman Live post show comes up right after this. Dad, what are your final words to the people?
The game has changed.
You didn't let me finish even.
Oh.
Dad, what are your final words to the people?
Now I can go?
Now you can go.
The game has changed. Remember, it is technology, along with, of course, individual valor, great commanders who are going to be less and less important. Technology drives warfare, and the game has changed, and we are all in peril.
That's how you want to end the show? We are all in peril.
We are in peril unless we adjust. Again, you got to adjust to changing times. What is that famous Bob Dylan song, The Times They Are A-Changin'?
Yeah.
Well, times they are a-changing, and we need to adjust.
Okay. Say goodnight,
That's
Dad.
more positive.
Okay. Say goodnight, Dad.
Good night. See you all on Thursday. Those who donated, members or gave us donations, we thank you. That keeps us going.